The wind howled across the frozen prairie like a wounded animal, dragging sheets of snow against the sagging fence posts of Elijah Boone's lonely farm, and when the knock came at his cabin door that night, it was so faint he almost mistook it for another trick of the storm. Elijah was a hard man carved by seasons of drought and grief, a widower with more land than hope and more silence than sleep, and he had long ago stopped expecting mercy from the world, so when he pulled open the door and found a woman standing there wrapped in a threadbare shawl, a child limp against her shoulder, his first instinct was suspicion, but what he saw in her eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't deceit, nor seduction, nor pride, but the raw, trembling edge of desperation. Her lips were blue, her boots split at the seams, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "I can warm your bed, milk your cow, please just feed my child." And though the words hung heavy between them, what Elijah heard beneath them was a mother's terror of watching her little boy starve. The child's small hand clutched her collar, his face pale as frost, and Elijah felt something stir inside him that he had buried the day his own wife and infant daughter were lowered into the frozen ground 5 winters ago. He stepped aside without another word, and the woman nearly collapsed as she crossed the threshold, the heat from the fireplace hitting her like salvation. She sank to her knees, clutching the boy as though someone might snatch him away, and Elijah closed the door against the storm, against the world, and against whatever judgment might come with it. He did not ask her name at first, only took the child gently from her arms and set him near the fire, pouring warm broth into a tin cup and holding it to the boy's lips. The child drank greedily, trembling, and the woman covered her face with both hands and wept, not soft tears, but the silent shaking sobs of someone who has held back pain too long. Elijah busied himself with practical things, bread sliced thick, blankets shaken out, more wood on the fire, because practicality was safer than emotion. When at last she could speak, she told him her name was Clara Whitmore, that her husband had died building the railroad further west, crushed beneath iron and greed, that the company had paid her nothing but condolences, and that the town she fled from had offered charity with one hand and humiliation with the other. She had walked for 2 days through sleet and hunger after being turned away from a church pantry that had already given enough, and by the time she saw the thin line of smoke rising from Elijah's chimney, she had nothing left but the willingness to trade her dignity for her son's survival. Elijah listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing, but inside him a war raged between caution and compassion. He knew how the town would talk if they saw a woman in his house, knew how quickly kindness could be twisted into scandal. Yet when he looked at the boy, Samuel, Clara called him, he saw the hollow cheeks of his own lost child, and that memory overruled every other voice. "You'll stay," he said simply, his tone firm as oak, and Clara's head snapped up in disbelief. "I don't want your bed," he added gruffly, almost offended by the implication. "I need help with the livestock, and you need shelter. That's all there is to it." But Clara understood that what he was offering was more than work, it was dignity restored. That night she slept on a cot near the hearth with Samuel curled against her, and Elijah lay awake in his room staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the fragile rhythm of another human breathing under his roof. He told himself it was temporary, that come spring she would move on, that he was only repaying a debt to humanity he had long ignored. Yet when he rose before dawn and found Clara already in the barn awkwardly attempting to milk Daisy the cow with numb fingers and fierce determination, something like reluctant admiration flickered in his chest. She was not delicate as he had assumed, nor weak, but sharpened by hardship. Samuel, fed and warmer, followed Elijah around the yard later that morning, asking small, curious questions about the chickens and the frost patterns on the trough, and Elijah answered more than he intended. By evening, the cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a home interrupted. Clara worked without complaint, scrubbing floors, mending torn feed sacks, humming lullabies that floated softly through the rafters, and Elijah found himself lingering by the doorway just to hear that sound. Yet danger loomed beyond the farm, in the form of townsfolk who noticed Clara's disappearance and began crafting stories, and when a neighbor rode past and spotted a woman hanging laundry beside Elijah's house, whispers began galloping faster than any horse. Still, inside the cabin, a fragile hope took root, fragile as the first green shoot after winter, and though neither of them dared name it, both felt the storm outside losing its power against the quiet courage forming within those wooden walls. By the time the thaw began to soften the earth, Clara had become as steady a presence on the farm as the sunrise, her hands no longer trembling when she milked the cows, her laughter, rare but real, echoing across the yard as Samuel chased chickens with determined mischief, and Elijah, who once counted days by silence, now measured them by small shared moments, a repaired fence built side by side, a loaf of bread split 3 ways, the warmth of lamplight illuminating tired but grateful faces, yet peace is seldom left unchallenged, and one afternoon a wagon rolled up the dirt path carrying 2 men from town, their expressions tight with judgment, claiming Clara owed rent for the shack she had fled and suggesting she had simply found another arrangement to survive. Clara's face burned with humiliation, but before she could speak, Elijah stepped forward with a steadiness that silenced even the wind, informing the men that Clara worked his land honestly, that no debt would be collected from a widow who had already paid in blood and tears, and that if they wished to press the matter, they would answer to him. The men left muttering threats wrapped in self-righteousness, and Clara trembled not from fear but from the shock of being defended. That night she confessed she had expected him to grow tired of the gossip and send her away, and Elijah, staring into the fire, admitted he had expected himself to do the same, but somewhere between Samuel's first healthy laugh and Clara's stubborn refusal to surrender, he had realized the farm no longer felt cursed by loss, it felt redeemed by resilience. Clara apologized again for her desperate words that first night, the offer made in hunger and shame, but Elijah shook his head and told her that no mother should have to bargain her worth to feed her child, that the world had failed her long before she reached his door. In the weeks that followed, the town's whispers faded beneath the undeniable evidence of hard work, the farm thriving, produce sold at market, Samuel growing strong and bright-eyed. Gradually, respect replaced rumor, and even the church pantry that once turned Clara away sent a modest donation of seed, a quiet acknowledgement of wrong. But the greatest transformation happened within Elijah himself, who one evening found Samuel asleep against his shoulder and felt not the ache of memory but the warmth of presence. He looked across the room at Clara sewing by lamplight, her face no longer hollow but quietly determined, and he understood that what had begun as charity had become partnership. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the gruff distance it once held. He asked Clara not as a bargain nor as rescue, but as an equal, whether she would consider staying not just through winter but through all seasons to come. Clara's answer was not dramatic, not filled with tears or grand declarations, but steady and sure. She would stay, not because she needed saving, but because together they had built something stronger than circumstance. The farm flourished in the years that followed, known not as Elijah Boone's lonely stretch of land but as a place where second chances took root. Travelers who passed through sometimes heard the story of a desperate knock during a storm, of a mother who offered everything for her child and a man who chose compassion over suspicion, and those who listened closely understood that the true miracle was not romance born of hardship but dignity restored through kindness. And as for Clara's whispered plea on that frozen night, it became a reminder etched into their lives that desperation does not define a person, courage does. So if this story moved you, if you believe in the power of compassion, resilience, and second chances, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more unforgettable tales of strength forged in the harshest winters, because sometimes the smallest act of mercy can rewrite an entire destiny, and the next story might be the one that stays with you long after the fire has burned low.